Hello, I'm Ryan Cook, and this is Civic Tech Chat, a show that looks at the way technology, politics, and policy impacts the world around us, the tools we use, the way services are delivered, and how we talk about and set policy all shape our society. We'll gather around and have a chat about these things together and more. Before we get started, I do want to let you all know that we've started a Discord for the podcast. There will be a link with an invite down in the episode description. Do feel free to go check that out. It's a small community right now, but hoping to grow it. It's a great way to reach out to me and let me know things that you might want us to cover, or to just hang out and talk about civic tech. Anyway, let's go ahead and start the show. Christopher, thank you so much for joining us here on Civic Tech Chat. Could you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about what you do?
Of course. My name is Christopher Whitaker. I am the Executive Director for the Alliance of Civic Technologists. We're a decentralized network of local civic technology organizations. I am a longtime civic technologist, kind of with the hybrid product bureaucracy hacker background. I've been on product teams at the United States Digital Service, the Defense Digital Service. I also have a bureaucracy hacking background where I've done federal acquisitions, was acting budget director over at DDS for a time, and now working as an engagement manager supporting an Air Force software factory. So have a very mixed set of skills that sort of helps translate the technical stuff to the bureaucracy stuff and vice versa.
What would you say is your personal why? The thing that drives you to get out of bed each morning and do all that stuff?
Yeah, I think for me, it's that I like to tackle big challenges, and civic tech is hard. We take an industry where we're supposed to be good at the technology stuff, coding, engineering, design, each with its own jargon and lingo, and sort of you have to work really hard to get good at just one of those things. And then we combine that with government and civic life, which has its own jargon and lingo and different levels from like federal to state to municipal, its own laws. And sometimes, depending on where you live, those laws don't like each other. And we mash them together into a single field. And it's incredibly difficult field that we've decided to create for ourselves. And for me, I like the challenge, and so that's kind of why I go after it. But it's definitely a team sport, and it is certainly a field where you have to have others standing shoulder to shoulder with you to get any of this done. It's a really complex, difficult field.
Speaking of complex, difficult fields, I think that's a great segue to get us into our main topic, which is about an organization that you're a core part of. Folks out there might or might not be aware that there was an organization, Code for America, that maintained a brigade network, and they announced their end of support for that February of last year. And when I talk about brigade network, what I'm referring to is there's a large assortment of groups, often grouped around municipalities or other local communities that organize volunteers, which then have the ability to get forms of organizational support from the nonprofit Code for America. I gather that your organization, Alliance of Civic Technologists, is meaning to fill this vacuum, for maybe a lack of a better way to describe the intention. Why did you decide to start this organization?
So I'll preface this by saying, like, the local organizations, they didn't go away. Like, just because Code for America sunsetted the program, like Code for Boston is still here, Beta NYC is still here, Code for Charlottesville is still here, Hack for LA, Civic Tech Atlanta, all those organizations are still here, still doing good work. And we want to be able to be the connective tissue between all these organizations and be an enabling organization to support them and to help them do their best work and to grow more organizations like Code for Philly and Code for Dayton. And so what we kind of started the organization almost as soon as it announced that the program was being sunset. We kind of had to lay some groundwork in terms of making sure we have um, sort of a 501(c)(3) started, um, making sure we had good fiscal sponsorship, making sure we had a good foundation to actually do what we set out to do. And that's kind of what the board has been doing over the past year. And now we're at the point where we can actually officially go from sort of our alpha phase to our beta phase, where we're signing up members formally into the network, building out our working groups, being able to host annual events, and starting mentorship programs, and really starting to be that connective tissue again, and starting to be a support function for those groups.
I've seen you mention that the organization Alliance of Civic Technologists, or ACT, maybe for folks that like acronyms, is more decentralized than the old network. You expressed that you don't necessarily have roots in the local communities that folks are out there volunteering in. So therefore, you don't really feel equipped to tell them what to do. You go on to describe that a role for ACT seems less like a source of directives and more like a support character. It's kind of the vibe I get from your words. What advantages do you see in taking this sort of approach?
And that was, I think, I think that'll be the biggest difference between ACT and the brigade program is there is, even though I'm like have a fancy title of executive director, we are certainly a decentralized networks. Our members are will have delegates, two delegates each plus an alternate. They will make up the voting body of the organization. We'll vote on a budget together. We'll elect board members together. When times need it, we'll pass resolutions together stating like this is how the network feels about this topic, and really the membership is going to drive the organization. So that's the first part is this is going to be a member driven organization. The second big part is act like we don't build products. We are not trying to run a telephone campaign in which we're trying to get everybody to call an elected representative with the same standardized message. Um, America's a big place, and cities are different. They have different challenges. They didn't have different um, players. They have different setups, and it seems silly to say that, hey, because I'm at the top of this organization, I should dictate what everyone works on, whether it be food security or reimagining 911 or any host of issues that you can pick out. All of these issues are important, but it might not be the most important thing to that city. Um, and every city's set up differently. Beta NYC has deep partnerships with both their local government and academia and um, sort of all the community partners in New York. New York is a huge place. Like the idea that a national headquarters can kind of steer local organizations, it just seems silly. And that's not what ACT's for. ACT is an enabler. We're here to be the connective tissue between all these organizations, convene them together so that we can learn from each other. We can talk about issues, mentor newer entrants into the space, um, and sort of figure out how we can use our network to support the work that's happening in local cities. Um, and if that means that we're mostly a supporting character, great. That's what it's here for.
I think something I hear in your description is a lot of importance on information sharing, or maybe another way to put it is like sharing of stories is maybe something I'm hearing in there. It sounds like there's a lot of local expertise out there that maybe something works in New York and maybe it's applicable in Tulsa or in LA, or and maybe that you're kind of stepping in to be this space where you're kind of helping be like a curated storyteller of a sort to kind of raise those things up. Am I along the right path for what your
Absolutely,
vision is?
absolutely. Yeah, one of the advantages that um, sort of the Civic Tech Network used to have is we had a vehicle in which to share wins with each other, lessons learned, and to sort of help communicate how we got there. Um, with the sunsetting of the program, we've kind of lost that a little bit, even though the work is still happening. And so one of the things that we want to do is be that storyteller to amplify wins and lessons learned, both nationally, um, and being just a vehicle to do that, be it informally through our Discord, or more formally through our newsletter, giving talks, and the annual event that we're going to have.
And I think another thing I heard in your answer before is you use the word like member driven, which seems to imply to me that there's then a need for like strong like member representation in order for this to kind of function well. Could you kind of talk a bit on that?
One of the things that we want to do is make sure that we're responsive to members' needs. If the entire purpose of ACT is to enable local civic tech organizations to do their best work, then we sort of have to listen to the local organizations and make calls based on what their needs are. And so the structure only works if we have local members involved. Um, so the way we'll structure the organization is we'll have working committees, sort of our membership committee to help bring in new members, sort of ensure the health of the network. We'll have a finance and fundraising committee that'll help us raise funds. We'll have an events committee that'll throw our annual event. Um, Sort of a working title, a education committee to help sort of codify and write playbooks and sort of do help share the lessons that we've learned through doing this work. And those are all going to be member driven, um, so that everybody will be able to take an active role in sort of shaping the network.
There's a state scoop piece, and you've also used this phrase actually here as we've been talking, where you're quoted as saying that we're not going to be building products, or we're not building products. It seems like you're really trying to communicate this focus on network building and organizing and support, which I think those phrases to me kind of start to sound like it's like you're building infrastructure, the things that
Mhm.
will allow the organizations to like work together in this big country that folks live in. Could you talk a bit about how this focus on network as your strategy, kind of how you see it playing out in kind of the near, medium, and longer term?
We want to develop ways to connect groups with each other so they can learn, be able to sort of join forces on joint efforts, be able to say in one voice that, hey, this piece of legislation that's going to Congress right now is either really, really good or really, really bad. Here's why. And you should listen to us because um, we are civic technology experts working in local communities. Many of us have professional jobs in government, be it in state government and federal government. Like this is what's up. We are as ACT itself. We're narrowly scoped to where we're primarily an enabler and a convener. We're not going to build product. That's what our local members will build product, but that's not our lane. We're mostly helping to build up these organizations, mentor newer organizations to get at sort of the same level as the Code for Phillies and the Code for Boston's, um, and really focusing on that. I don't think we're going to ever go into a situation where somebody produces a product and we're going to go, hey, we're going to scale this nationally and have like 1 million users. That's not our purpose.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, as you said, like that mention about scale, it made me realize, oh, like so far we're this far into the conversation, and that word hasn't come up one time, and I think that's perhaps intentional, right? Is that kind of? It seems like that kind of thinking is maybe something you're trying to, maybe avoids too strong of a word, but not necessarily walk into.
And that's part of why we're decentralized, is because we don't know the user need in every city. So if in some places, I'll pull an example of a civic tech app from the Chicago area called Expungio. Um, it was an app that helped assist um, youth who had juvenile records get them expunged. Um, you go fill out a form. They would do sort of a quick gut check to see if you're a good candidate for expungement, and then they would feed that information to a local nonprofit who would then assist with getting the record expunged. Makes sense in Illinois. It does not make sense in a state that has automatic juvenile expungement, which really is probably the preferred way to go. Just make it automatic. Um, so if you're trying to um, scale something like Kathy Ding's expunge.io nationally, well, you're already going to run into issues in states that do this automatically. And so it's, to me, because we are enabler, where it makes sense to have apps redeploy, that's a decision that's made locally, and we can assist with that. But that is a benefit. That's not a like a goal of, hey, we're going to scale this app across the country and it'll be great and our branding will be all over it. That's not what we're doing. We're starting as good civic technologists, we're supposed to focus on user needs first and then everything else.
As you go into this beta phase, as you mentioned, and you seek to grow that membership, what do you think will make for a successful local chapter that's seeking to join?
One of the things that makes for successful chapters is having a strong leadership structure in that you have a large team of people who help run the organization. You have good partnerships with your local community, be that government or the nonprofits in your community. Um, you have good trust and safety guardrails. One of the things we require is a code of conduct that has descriptions of how you enforce the code of conduct. Um, and just being good at running a volunteer group, which is a skill that you have to learn. It's not something that people can just throw together. And that's part of why we built in a mentorship model for newer organizations, because we don't want to hey, sign this thing and now you're a member, but rather like we want to make sure that we're not setting people up for failure and to make sure they have all the right tools they need and structure they need to be able to succeed.
That is a good thing to hear. I remember being somebody in that newbie chair and effectively being handed just like a pile of documents, and it's like, good luck. That was kind of my experience with the network at Good for America. Sounds like you're maybe trying to be a bit more proactive with how the mentoring will
Yeah,
work.
yeah. So our on the 29th, we're going to open up our membership drive. We're primarily going to focus on established groups in our first wave. So these are organizations that, um, you know, they've been around for a while. Hint, hint, it's all the former brigade people. Or groups like Shy Hack Night, which wasn't part of the brigade program, but certainly one of the oldest and largest and most active civic tech volunteer organizations in the country. Um, so for those that have sort of been established, we've set it up to where like they can become members pretty easy, like because they have all the things that make local civic tech organizations work. For new organizations, um, we're going to do a different membership drive in the spring for people who want to start these organizations. And the reason why we're delaying and not doing it all at once is whenever someone expresses interest, what we want to do is we want to pair them with an existing organization as a mentor to talk about like, here were our challenges. Oh, here's how you find a local space to host your events. Here's some good ideas for finding sponsorships to help buy pizza. Here's some of the challenges about fiscal sponsorship that you should probably know about. And just sort of like guide people and help them get to the level where we're like, okay, these are the standards that we need people to hit in order to become an official member. We're going to help you get there. And then when you're ready, you tell us, we'll we'll check to make sure, but then we'll make you a full member with voting rights and the whole shebang.
And there at the end, you mentioned the existence of some standards, which I had a chance to get to peek at that a little bit in that document you let me look at that you'll be circulating around. But can you talk a bit about the importance of setting those kinds of standards for this sort of setup?
Yeah, so it kind of circles back to um, not wanting to set people up for failure. The biggest part for me is sort of making sure you have a place where people can find you on the internet, a place where people can um, find your group and register to attend one of the public events. We want to make sure that when people say that, hey, I'm a local civic tech organization, we want to check to make sure you're actually real. So, like you're meeting regularly, you have at least three people on your leadership team. Um, you have a code of conduct that sort of meets a minimum standard for trust and safety. You have a plan to enforce it. You're all set up to be able to do this work. Um, and if people don't hit that immediately, that's fine. That's why we have the mentorship program. I think it's important that if we say you're a chapter and that you have voting rights and that you can participate in the larger network in a leadership capacity, because that's ultimately every member is a leader in the civic tech network, then we want to make sure that people are ready to go.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing there is, by going through mentoring and ultimately like meeting those standards, checking the box to show viability, you're kind of like earning your voice in the larger community.
One of the lessons that we learned from the brigade program is sort of when you experience this hyper growth, you get some really solid chapters, and then you get chapters that just they either become ghost chapters where they're on paper but they don't exist because they're not meeting, they don't have leadership, and we want to kind of avoid having zombie organizations. And so by sort of putting some structure, some standards in place, we sort of avoid that problem.
You mentioned one specific one, or I think you mentioned like having three leaders. I imagine there's others. How have you gone about trying to set the kind of the specifics of like what centers make for a good viable organization?
Yeah, so we have a working document that the community's been kind of commenting on and going back and forth. So it's been a collaborative process with leaders from across the network, and wanted to create sort of what a minimal viable chapter would look like.
As you get to this beta status, and maybe in that executive director role, you're starting to think even beyond that. What are kind of other crucial milestones or capabilities you'd like to see ACT get to as you work towards maturing the network?
So one of the things that we want to try to do this summer is host a ACT Congress, and basically having that be our annual event. I imagine the first one's going to be virtual, um, just to make it a little easier for us to host as we sort of get rolling. But for our second one, we'd like to do it in person and kind of gather everyone up together. This will be similar to the Brigade Congress that we had previously, and really a chance for people to gather, um, present their wins, talk through issues, um, and learn from each other and really form those connections that sort of make the network stronger. So that to me is going to be our sort of big milestone for next year is being able to host that conference. The other milestones we're looking at is sort of number of members, and then seeing our mentorship program succeed and being able to bring in brand new organizations that hadn't existed before, um, and really start to grow again is going to be what gets me excited.
That does sound exciting. As someone who misses the experience that Brigade Congress used to bring, I'll have to keep an eye out for when you announce that. Maybe try to find a way to sneak over to it and do some coverage there. I imagine there'll be a lot of folks that are excited for that experience to happen again. Continuing this theme of thinking about the future, though, what sort of challenges do you see for the Alliance coming up?
So one of the bigger challenges, I think, uh, is sort of the environment we're going to be operating in after the 2024 election. I know there's a temptation to say like civic tech should be sort of this nonpartisan, neutral, area in which like we don't really take sides. Like this can work for everybody. And I like that sentiment, but it sort of crashes hard with reality. Um, United States Digital Service is run by a political appointee. So the election will have a direct impact on what our premier organization does. Whoever takes control of Congress and the White House will have the ability to change laws that have a direct impact. And as technologists, we have to be careful of sort of what comes out of that. Certainly, there the advancement of AI and how it impacts our work is something that could really change, have a huge impact in government in both good or bad ways. If you're now pushing for AI to take over some of the judgment in whether someone gets benefits or not, well, they've tried that in Michigan with its Midas unemployment system that ended up having thousands of people accused of unemployment fraud. All their benefits stop because the algorithm got it wrong. Um, we have a whole bunch of recent examples where algorithms get it wrong and it impacts social services. There's also, on the flip side, things like Clear My Record were a great win for the civic tech field because we were able to help expunge marijuana convictions for hundreds of thousands of people. It's a fantastic program. Clear My Record only happens when marijuana decriminalization happens. Without the community organizations that fought for years to not only get marijuana legalized, but have those provisions that allowed for those records to be expunged, none of that Clear My Record work happens. It just doesn't. And so as we look to issues around climate change, transgender rights, women's health, privacy, are you being tracked from one state to the other because you're trying to get health care? And technology is enabling that. How to like these are big thorny issues, and how the election turns out will dictate what fights we end up taking on because like pick your future here. And so I think one of the challenges beyond just kind of the normal building up a new nonprofit and fundraising and all the things that every nonprofit volunteer organization has to do is the environment which we're going to be operating on. So if you're listening after the election, we'll have our answer. Um, but that's sort of one of the things that are top of mind for me because I don't think we live in a world where like we can just sort of be hands off in the middle and not take a side on these topics. We have to take a side because we understand both the policy implications of what's happening as well as how technology is being used both for really big positive impacts and really big negative impacts.
That is a really good point. Honestly, just being a living person in the country by default, you're impacted by the politics of the country, right? Whether you want to be or not. And I imagine, you're a large, a growing organization with a lot of like local groups in different places. And I imagine different folks are personally affected by things in different ways, kind of impacting their worldview is and maybe in different conflicting ways at times. Um, uh, are these conversations the sort of thing you see kind of happening in the network already? And if so, like how do you kind of seek to facilitate that in times like ours?
Yeah, so I think so, well, for things that are really um, contentious, I think hosting sort of moderated discussions over these events. Um, but one of the things that we're going to do early on is have um, solidify our values document. This was something that brigades did um, early on when we started having brigade congresses saying, okay, these are our values. And I think it's a good exercise, regardless of how the election turns out. Uh, but something that says, here are the things that we believe and we feel that are worth fighting for. And I think that being sort of the guiding, sort of providing some guiding principles will help us not only have these conversations, but pick and choose sort of when it comes down to it, what things are we going to stand shoulder for shoulder on and say this is worth all of us coming together to fight for?
Something I saw in my own experiences doing the brigade leadership thing during the CFA days was there was this kind of side effect that would occur where all of a sudden there was this emerging talent pipeline that was kind of appearing going through these different projects through the partnerships we were doing. Folks would come in, and it turns out these things would provide a space where you could learn new things, gain some experience, and there wasn't really like a ton of risk. You know, if you broke something, you weren't taking down like a multi-million dollar system or something, right? So you could kind of learn and get better at your craft. How do you view this sort of side effect in this in the context of the alliance, and what place, if any, do you think it has?
Yeah, I that's one of my favorite things about uh civic sort of these volunteer civic tech things. It does it is a great recruitment tool for government and for for civic organizations. Um the um for people to be able to come in. So, like, I have a government background. I have a master's of public administration. My first job out of college, my first real job out of college, was working for an unemployment office in Chicago during the Great Recession, which at the time was like the worst economic crisis of our lifetimes. And that's actually how I got into civic tech because I went in, turned on my machine, and was greeted by a system from 1975. Not a real-time system. And it's a mainframe system. So like every time I did something, I didn't know for sure if it worked until the next morning when I printed out a ream of paper about all the transactions that happened the day before. I was mad. Like like I am not coming in this from a like an altruistic point of view. I'm coming in because I was pissed off because as a public servant trying to do good work and help my community during this crisis, I didn't have the best tools for the job. And so me, not knowing anything about technology, starts going to local tech events and meets Derek Eater, who started Shy Hack Night, and started learning more about the technology stuff. And then started like things started clicking together. I'm like, oh, like user-centered design. Of course, this is no wonder I was mad at the new system they gave me. None of these things applied. And from other side, you have people like Harlan Weber who, trained as a designer, joined Code for Boston, started learning more about government, and started getting more and more knowledgeable about like sort of how the sausage is made on government side. And when you combine these two skill sets together, you create a new kind of hacker, the civic technologist. Um, and I and civic technologists to me are very are great allies for local governments and community organizations to have it for those organizations who want to make good impact. Um, because we can sort of straddle the line between all the stuff you have to do on the government policy side and all the stuff you have to do on the technology side, help bridge those things together and really enable those those change makers to make the impact that they want to have. Um, and if I like the idea of us being Civic Tech's front door, because anybody can come to one of these events, play around, learn, and if they're interested, you now have a vast network of people who have very senior roles in civic tech organizations, whether it be United States Digital Service, um, state government, local government, in nonprofit organizations, and some of these newer companies that specialize in civic tech. And so it's a sort of a built-in network to help people who try this out, find that that's what they want to make a career in. Now you've got a whole network of people who can help you get there.
Speaking of talented people out there, perhaps there's some enthusiastic ones. They're listening to this conversation and they're like, "Wow, you know, maybe in my neighborhood, in my city, we can have a local group, and I want to help put it together." What advice would you give them as they're thinking about getting started?
Yeah, so the best place to start, if you go to civictechnologists.org, you'll see a link to signing up for our newsletter and then signing up for our Discord. Um, Definitely join the Discord, introduce yourself. That's where a lot of our conversation happens. Um, and then um, we'll start to announce like our events and um, sort of that's where those conversations will happen, including how to start an organization. If you're running an organization and want to join, that's how we'll do it through that website and sort of use that to communicate out to the network. Um, so that's definitely where I'd start.
And if there's someone that's out there that's like, maybe, running a group isn't for me, but I still want to be involved, how should they go about either trying to find that local group, or I'm not sure if there's also like you're looking for volunteers kind of in the network part as well.
Yeah. So what I'd encourage people to do is join the Discord. If there's an existing group in your area, we'll connect you. If there's not, when the time's right, we'll help you start one. And then we we do need, I mean, we need help getting everything going. There's a lot of work to be done. And so we're kind of using the Discord to sort of coordinate our efforts and get things rolling.
Oh, and if there's, I don't know, potentially an enterprising organization or someone who works in one, and they're like, hey, maybe I could like convince this organization to help, help out in like that sponsorship type capacity. Is that something y'all are open to as well?
Totally. Join the Discord, reach out to us as sort of the best front door.
Awesome. Well, you heard it, folks. Go to that Discord, check out the website. There is a place for you if you have that civic tech interest. And Christopher, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us and tell us about the Alliance of Civic Technologists.
Thank you for having me.
You can follow us on Twitter using the handle @CivicTechChat, visit us on the web at civictech.chat, or subscribe to us for content updates wherever it is you download your podcasts.